Welcome to another episode of Life in Bali. I'm DC Poohbah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives. And Life in Bali is our escape from the doldrums of Zen that we upload the other 5 days of the week that we aren't honoring the Sabbath. Because on Sunday we don't upload unless there's something extraordinary happens. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable and free from economic distress and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of do as little harm as possible. Today's guest, the Honorable Mr. David Kubiak, isn't in Bali. He's in Rajasthan in India, in Udaipur. And he's a friend from Japan. I knew him in Japan when I was living there. And I've also seen him in America. He is an American. And he's going to talk about corporations as inoperable cancer, and large corporations. And he's going to talk about chi, right? And about attention, and about how to deal with the social problems of the world and our personal problems. And he's a smart guy, David Kubiak. He became good friends with Richard Baker when Baker was in Japan. He has comments on a number of interesting people. It's always interesting to talk to. He's awfully well informed. And you know, toward the end, he talks about Bali, and he tells me about stuff that's happening here that sounds really interesting. So you'll learn about him when we talk with him. Now, as far as life in Bali goes for Katrinka and me, well, it's going pretty good. The virus has not been expanding exponentially here. It's sort of was taking a downturn, if anything. So we'll see what happens. But things are pretty nice. There's, we go to the beach some days, there's just nobody there. And other days, there might be 50 people around, and almost entirely locals. Very peaceful, very nice. It's all right when there's tourists, too. It's never too busy here. Get to the beach a couple of times a week. Katrinka gets there every day. She's a walking fiend. That's why I tell people that's her religion. She does zazen and she does yoga quite a bit. But man, I want to say, she frequently walk for 2 hours in a day. And she's hard to keep up with for me, and her legs are much shorter. Anyway, I don't know what else there is to say. Just doing a lot of work on the Cuke archives and trying to keep up, and enjoying making the podcast, especially when I have someone as interesting and informative to talk with as David Kubiak. So, hey, let's take it away, David. Let's give him a call.
Third time's a charm.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you
Oh,
hear me?
oh yeah, that's great. Oh, great. Ah, we have great tech support here. Uh, really, I had to send a WhatsApp to my tech guy, say, hey, I can't download the recording program. It won't. This is my alternate PC. It's an old one, and it wouldn't let me. And so he said, okay. So I put on Team Viewer. He gets on my computer. It took him a little while, but finally he downloaded the program, and I can because I want to record you, and there's a great program for recording um, Facebook calls, Messenger. So hey, David, how you doing?
Okay. My spirits are rather lifted and relieved by the curse of the planet subsiding a bit.
I
So,
know what you mean.
yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
I think everybody should be burning candles of gratitude tonight to a woman named Jo Jorgensen, who actually made this all happen.
yeah. And
Did you?
how was that?
Did you see she was the candidate. She was the first female candidate ever for the Libertarian Party.
Oh, right. I did notice that. I didn't go. Good for her. Good. So she took votes from the evil Republican.
Yes, I mean, like she took a reliable 1 to 1.5% in the
Yeah,
races like Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, where the difference between Trump and Biden was only like 0.5%, right?
yeah,
So you can presume that at least half of her voters would have voted for Trump instead, and we would not be having this moment of grateful relief. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, good for her. I did notice that, and I noticed she had. I can't remember what state now. Might have been Georgia. She had 49,000. One of them. It was significant what she had.
yeah.
But anyway, yeah. Oh, happy day. Uh, well, you sound good. You sound good. Are you in Rajasthan?
I am Rajasthan. I'm in Udaipur.
Who died?
Uh,
I never made it there. I'd love to go. I love Rajasthan.
So when we have to wait for your next toothache to get you over here, I don't know what's the proper motivation.
Well, money. It's just money. I just can't afford to go there. If I go there, uh, it would be my wife and me. I'd love for her to see it. And we live in Bali. I've never been back to America since we came here 7 years ago. She goes, but that's that's uh, also I'm I'm real. Actually, going there to see you is about the only visiting I want to do aside from seeing my sons. But one of them's been here a couple of times, and one of them he's going to get here, I think, as soon as he can.
You've been in Bali 7 years now. That's about almost how long I've been here in Udaipur.
Oh,
Solid.
is that
So
right? Is that
yeah,
right? Well, Jay and Cuke have been there, right?
they visited a couple times. They were doing business with Jodhpur and they dropped down here once for a week. That was really
Ye-
cool.
Oh God, I'd love to go. I'd love to go. Well, we'll see. Something might come up.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, we might, everything. What we learned this year is that there is nothing. What was the old joke? You know how to make God laugh? You say no. Make a plan. You know,
right, 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 right,
this
right.
year was the year of total unplannedness, unplannability. It's been extraordinary, and then there's been so much bad luck in so many ways that you figure our probability curve is backed up for a tsunami of good fortune if we're ever gonna if we believe in the probability curve at all. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see. No, I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I wanna, you know, I wanna ask you what you're doing there.
Right now, I am, over the course of the last year, I have been almost in every sense disoriented. And because consciousness is sort of fleeing from the local activities. Most of the things we try to do here with the government, which is what your partner always becomes in these things, they've shut off the. We have a small NGO here,
Oh
which
yeah.
is now called Big Medicine Charitable Trust, which has a very fancy name for a very tiny operation. But we spark plugged a lot of when we first came back. We brought in we were doing cultural exchange. We've been doing that back and forth between Kyoto and Udaipur for many years.
Oh
Bring
really?
yeah, we had a grassroots citizens sister city program going, and we brought over performers and educators, environmentalists, and artists, and we took local people back to Kyoto and did shows, art shows, and performance shows, and stuff like that. So we'd done that for quite a while. And when we got back here, we developed a relationship with this international dance troupe out of New York called Vanover Caravan,
Hmm.
and brought them in for a performance tour, and everybody fell in love with them. And the collector, the local, it's hard to explain to a general audience how India works,
Mm-hmm.
but the country is divided into states, and the states are divided into large districts, and each district has like a almost a colonial power sitting in the center of it. It's appointed by the central government called the collector, and he
Hmm.
used to be the person who collected taxes. And they basically are the arm of the national I mean, they're bureaucratic. They're not partisan theoretically, but they run everything, and they can step across mayors and across local democratic bodies here, and so they're people you want them to be decent, and you want them to be collaborative, and you want to be friends with them.
Right.
And the first guy saw all the news we were getting because of a lot of the guys that come through here are rather young, and they're very ambitious. And they're from the Indian Administrative Service, which is sort of like the SS of the government. They were designed to manage the country and to, I mean, manage it on a local basis, so it serves the national interest.
Mm-hmm.
And they can go, guys that are smart in that, and it's a very creme de la creme kind of outfit. They can rise really high in the political hierarchies. So they come in and they're very well. A lot of them are very interested in their media profile, and since we were getting all this free media or earned media or whatever you call it, he said, "Well, why don't you come and buddy with me, and I'll give you money to do." What we were calling eco-artistic uh, concerts, like 5 or 6 hour concerts that we would do in some public place every other Sunday. And they were called Shakti Sundays.
Hmm.
And we would use the local musicians and stuff to draw a crowd. And then we would put NGO people who were working on different NGO causes that we thought were admirable or interesting. And so it was part environmental education and part just boogie. And anyway, it became a big deal. And we'd get 1,000 or 1,500 people every Sunday to do that. And then this guy gets transferred. And that's the other thing. These guys are here a maximum of 2 years. So no matter how
Oh.
powerful they are and how friendly you get, anything you're doing with them disappears when they go. And then
Uh-huh.
you're playing Russian roulette with the next guys you get, and it gets very discouraging. But the other thing we went into was organic farming, and because the default farming here is organic, but the people here are so ashamed to say that they can't afford the pesticides and all of the the
Right.
agrochem, that they don't brag about it. And then people make fun of them because of their slightly misshapen vegetables and things. So they get actually less. I mean, it's the purest food in the country, and they get less money than anybody else for it. And it's all
Uh,
dumped in with the commercial stuff, so you never really know what you're getting in any of the markets at all.
hmm.
So there's a beginning here of a organic farming movement, and we got a village about an hour and a half outside the city here, up by a huge lake. There's largest man-made lake in India is a couple hours out of town, that they set up back in the 15th century,
Oh,
and the villages around that are just astonishingly beautiful. And because of the rise and fall of the lake water, the silt has fertilized the land there for the last century, and so they've never needed chemicals. And when the government came and tried to give it to them, they would just put them in a warehouse someplace and say, "Thank you very much." So we were
huh.
able to get the whole village up there certified internationally for as an organic village. It was the first one in Rajasthan that was ever certified as a full living environment. So anyway, we do stuff like that, and it's but it's really maddening because you are always dealing with the government, which is very unstable. And right now, because of the BJP, the right wing Hindu nationalists,
Yeah.
their backing organization, it's called the RSS, that was started well before independence and stuff. But they're a Hindu supremacist group,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. They get a lot of global attention in
yeah.
news.
So anyway, they've become de facto the biggest NGO organization in the country. And when other organizations like Greenpeace or Amnesty International or anybody else is trying to work on human rights, which they're always running up against because of their, Hindu supremacy thing, the human rights aspect of things goes away very quickly. And they're a bonded group between the corporate elites and the sort of what the evangelical style Hindus here. I mean, it's
Right.
the same pattern as America, really. You've
Right.
got
And they're also popular with some Hindus I know here. Uh, uh, not Balinese Hindus who don't know anything about that, or and don't but Pakistani Hindus, were descended from that, very supportive of Modi and that, and very popular in America with Hindus there too.
yeah. I mean, they've had these organizations that go out to this. I mean, we were at one back about 20 years ago when the local Maharana here was addressing one of their national meetings in New York, and they filled up this huge auditorium with all these really super rich Indians, and they got up and kept making speeches saying, "Don't feel guilty about not being back in America, back in India, and don't feel guilty about this or that. Just be proud representatives and keep sending us money." That was the whole rap for the whole fucking day, trying to shake down these crowds by telling them not to feel guilty about what they probably didn't feel guilty about in the first place, but were supposed to feel guilty about by the time they left. And but the whole thing is because of their status here, and because of the shit that they're doing at the moment, well, not at the moment, but pretty steadily, that the foreign NGOs, especially like Greenpeace and what the World Wildlife Fund, and who else has been sort of banned here, they're they're they put a throttle on any money they can get from overseas, and then they hassle the living shit out of you about all your activities and stuff. So that has kept us from actually prospering here. I mean, being able to afford any kind of activity. You know,
Now,
there's local support, but when you're doing international stuff, and especially when you're doing environmental stuff, the like the Monsanto crowd is here in force. They've set up big billboards around the agricultural universities and stuff. They're really battling away, and then they work with the local right-wing guys and to try to stamp out anything that looks too anti, better living through chemical kind of living. I mean,
Right, right. Now, do you have an NGO, or what NGO are you talking about that you're involved with?
as I said, it's Big Medicine Charitable Trust. It's just a tiny little
Uh-huh.
place.
Yeah,
So
I forgot. Uh, wow, Big Medicine Charitable Trust?
yeah,
Huh, huh.
well, that's the format that they label on you for the kind of stuff we were trying to do. Otherwise, you have to have like 50 directors and all sorts of stuff, and have government people sitting in your back pocket and things like that. So anyway, it was a comfortable format we discovered, and it
Uh-huh.
was a descendant of we had an NGO in the States uh, called Big Medicine, which
Hmm.
was there to, I mean, it was like a micro think tank. We just sort of supported projects that showed people how malignant the huge corporate bodies were on the planet, and how they were, basically a cancer on the biosphere and on the body politic. And those were that was why it was medicine against bigness is what we were trying to come up with,
Yeah,
the idea.
yeah.
And then 9/11 came along, and I got they made me the sort of national director of 9/11truth.org, which I ran for like the first 2.5 years, and we used um, our Big Medicine account as a pass through for contributions to that,
Hmm.
which actually made us illegal. So we lost our 501c3 status
Uh-oh.
shortly after that. So, but anyway, it still sits there as a little relic. of, maybe you can revive it someday, since the
What, and
political stuff has passed.
what was 9/11 truth?
9/11 truth was that the whole official story was 80% confected and bullshit, and we worked with the mothers in New Jersey that fought for the commission that ended up whitewashing it anyway. But we did a lot of we we're basically trying to point out the fact that there was so much bullshit that was happening there, and again, the follow the money and all of the different aspects of it that didn't make any sense or weren't reported or were suppressed deserved a sweeping reconsideration. And it also tracked down all of the synchronicity between Bush's first cabinet meeting, saying that the main thing he wants to do is get in Iraq, and they passed around the Iraq oil
Yeah,
fields. And
yeah.
then and he was also, he was anxious to hit him back because of his papa, etc. All of those kind of folk legend stories.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the air defenses and everything started to collapse around the country in a sort of interesting way, and all of the previous preparations that have been done for those kind of attacks was put on hold or officially forgotten. And so the idea that there is some collaborative affinity between the people who wanted war and got it with a passion, and all the people who wanted things like the Patriot Act, the number of beneficiaries of the 9/11 attacks are huge and extraordinarily profited by the entire thing, whereas most everybody else has been, terrified and impoverished.
Mm.
So the main breakthroughs, though, besides all of the documentation of all of the lies that were going into the official story, was when all of a sudden the architects and engineers of the country, who were totally non-political. I mean, some of these guys are Trump people, and some of these guys are, Bernie people, and some of these guys are just sort of middle of the road or non-political at all. But they're all registered engineers and architects, and they just could not they they watched the films of Building 7 going down,
Right.
uh, and they said that just violates all laws of physics.
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
And three and a
Building
half
7
thousand of these
was.
guys sign on. I mean,
Yeah.
and knowing because 9/11 Truth is a huge, fruity world. I mean, it's a big tent, and it's got some really brilliant people, and it's got some of the most batshit people you've ever met in your life.
Wow. Hey, I'm gonna. 9/11 talk can go on for 24 hours. I
Yeah.
want to move back to what you're talking about corporations out of balance, let's say, being a cancer on the world. I want to mention when I first met you, I'm sure it was through Jay and Kilks in Kyoto. And I was going to Kyoto and I went there and to meet you at uh, at the Osaka Flower Exposition. Was that it? Uh, and where you, I went to the press box, the press building, to meet you, and you were showing press around, going to different corporate, uh, um,
Exhibit.
exhibitions,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and where they were showing all these flowers from around the world and stuff. But you were talking about what each corporation was doing to destroy the environment in Borneo or whatever, wherever. Uh, and so that's how you were very busy. So we basically that day just said hello, and I was just sort of overwhelmed with what was happening. Uh, but that was the first time I met you, and that was like in 1991 or something. Uh, I
Yeah, I've been on the anti-corporate thing since the '80s, and to
yeah,
no magnificent effect, but the the theme. I mean, it's taken over three countries that I love, and in very different ways and extraordinarily different cultures, but they're all totally corporate dominated. In terms of their policy and evolutionary trajectory, and destroying things that I really loved about all three countries.
you're
And
talking about the United States, Japan, and India.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
no, that's my area of concern. I have permanent resident status here in India and permanent resident status in Japan and genetic resident status in America, uh, and the tragedies are somewhat diverse, but the causality is all the same. I mean, it's the corporations are just running the show, and like America now, we're supposed to be. Well, we are actually. We're grateful at the exit of the dunce, but to think that there's so much celebration over a corporate Democrat like Biden coming
Yeah, yeah,
in. I mean,
yeah,
Delaware is the national whorehouse for the entire corporate world.
yeah. Well, I was aware of, of course, the omnibus crime bill, but as has been pointed out, John Lewis voted for it, so it was a big mistake. But more than that, I remember when Biden sponsored the bill to make it where your credit card debt would follow you into future lives. Uh,
Yes, yes, yes,
and
yes.
the bankruptcy bill and all that. That's terrible. Yeah, they should turn that around. They might, but I don't know. Republicans actually had a very good day yesterday. That it was just the one exception was Trump. Uh, they didn't lose a single House seat. They did much better than was expected in many ways. But we'll see what happens with that. That's another one of those endless conversations. I want to go back and hear how you got into all this. Like you were born in Maine?
No, I was born in People's Hospital in Akron, Ohio.
Oh, is that right? Uh,
My
I
family was,
remember a Maine connection for some reason.
no, most of my life was in Maine, but we spent in Kent. We lived in Kent, Ohio, where Kent State University.
Oh yeah, I've been there. I've been there. I've got many cousins. Well, I've got three cousins, but a big family uh, in Akron, and so I've gone to Akron a number of times. And there's a Buddhist fellow, uh, Brad Warner, who wrote Hardcore Zen. He's a really cool guy. He took me to Kent State because he's from Akron. He happened to be there when I was there last 10 years ago or something. He took me to Kent State and showed me where uh, the killings of the students happened, and he showed me this like thick metal plate that was hanging from a wall that had one or two bullet holes in it that they were using, like metal piercing bullets. Um, Incredible. It was very sad. But I also went to the Cleveland Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and loved that.
It's an anecdote, yeah.
Yeah. So, could you tell us how you went from getting born there to getting in
Well,
uh,
a quick
to
thing back
Japan?
is that my father had been working on the. I got born and flushed him out of law school, so he had to go to work. And he started an animal food business, and then he ended up working for a big animal food distributor as a road salesman and just burned out. And then my mother was from Kent. Her father had been a state senator there, and he co-founded the political science department at Kent State University.
Hmm.
So we went back to live there. Her brother was working at a place called was the music store, and so my father went to work there. He ended up loving the town. He started his own company there that sold high-end appliances and furniture and sewing machines and stuff for you know upper middle class kind of folks, and made enough money that he bought a farm for my mother, and it was like a 60-acre organic farm that had been run by this one surviving lady. She was like almost a shaker. So at the age of 10, we got moved to a farm, and my father didn't know anything about farming. He just wanted to keep the place alive by working at this store in town. And he said, "Here, all this is yours." And I ended up with 40 sheep and a couple of unfreshened cows and a bunch
At
of
what
rabbits.
age?
10.
Oh,
So I was overwhelmed, and my days had gone from being a very comfortable walk to school to having to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to feed all these animals and clean up their shit. And there were like 60 chickens and all this. Anyway, it was a beautiful little boutique farm, but it was way over the head of me. And so we brought in my grandmother's brother, who was an alcoholic race driver from Sebring. And he was a genius in all things mechanical. He taught me to drive when I was 11. And I grew up there for 5 years, and quite idyllically, but somewhat lonely. And then the malls came to Kent area and destroyed the downtown, including my father's store. And he hit the road, and we ended up in Kennebunkport, Maine, in this
ah,
1960. So
ah.
that, and so I finished out high school there and went to college at Bowdoin in Maine,
Ah.
and tried to study consciousness there.
Ah.
And the I
What
joined the
year did you
psychology.
graduate from high school?
62.
Uh-huh.
So then, at those days, consciousness was not a big deal in the 60s, had not really arrived. And so psychology was essentially learning how to torment pigeons and rats in intriguing ways.
Uh-huh.
And behaviorism was the gospel. And so then I had to branch out, and I did stuff in philosophy and in uh, comparative religions to try to find out about consciousness. That's when I first heard about Buddhism and Zen and all these other strange, exotic practices. And then went back to the psychology department and learned about physiological psychology and the effects of drugs and neural, what's now called neuro linguistic programming and things like that.
Oh yeah, sure. NLP.
So anyway, but have my younger education in my father was a Catholic, and so my mother had to convert to Catholicism, and I had to go to the local parochial school, and I had learned to read very early thanks to mother. And then we started when they start you in the catechism classes and the Bible classes, I would actually read all this stuff, and we would read through the Bible, and then I'd come back with these really unpleasant questions for the nuns, and then they would send me to the principal where she would beat on my hand with a ruler. And
Ah.
it started to fascinate me about the functioning of this religion and
Uh-huh.
how you were
Uh-huh.
supposed to think about things and what you were supposed to look at and what you were not supposed to look at. But it also gave me the idea that actually ideas have power. I mean, they can get you punished for just asking bad questions.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So that 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 sort of alerted me to the and just as we were finishing there, actually, a friend of mine who's was a son of a German scientist immigrant who had fled from Germany just before the war, and he was a professor at Kent State University, and his son and I became dear friends. And he came up and in the eighth grade, he gave me a copy of Mein Kampf,
Wow.
and he said, "Read this." And so I read it, and then we had a little two-person discussion sessions, because everything that we saw about how you organize people and how you make things happen, and the whole generation of spectacle and religious following and mindless obedience, everything that was sort of laid out in Mein Kampf, he took straight out of the Catholic Church, and he was a Catholic. you know. So
Uh-huh.
we were talking about that in eighth grade, and then as you move on and get into high school, and they put you into ROTC kind of stuff, there's a whole anyway. You begin to see the architecture of the power structures in America and anywhere in the world actually, and how the military manages to cream off everything. Because I tested very well when I went to school, and that was one of my few talents. So when they did these national testings, I got good grades and stuff. And when we were at Kent State University, I was there at the high school. The Kent State University is a normal school. It's designed to teach teachers. So they have their own high school there that is supposed to give teachers teaching experience it's like an internship before you go off into the world. Like for a doctor would go through an internship, and you would go through this high school or this whole school system that they set up. And the the it was a scientifically designed school. They took kids from the countryside, poor kids. They took kids from the rich suburbs. They took kids from the middle class suburbs, and they jammed them all together. So it was a very democratic kind of situation, because you had people who were actually being shipped in to represent a certain demographic, and then you were just supposed to hang out and go to school with them and learn about them as people. And the the interesting thing was, though, that they would train you for test taking, because that school cost the state money to put on, and therefore they had to produce the best you know test scores. So we became sort of like test samurai, and we didn't have to go to the regular classes. We went to classes about how you succeed in the testing regime. And because of the scores I was getting, the military was sending me all these letters saying, "Hey, if you want to go to college and give us, 10 years of your life, we'll put you through any place." And so it was, you could already feel the suction that was drawing out young minds that were, somewhat active and interesting, and already drawing them toward the military industrial complex, which became the biggest concentration of scientific talent and malpractice in the world,
Mm-hmm.
devoting a whole generation just to how cooler ways to kill people. So anyway, all of that was sort of a briefing for moving on into the outer world, and that's where I started studying consciousness, and then I started noticing that, as I came after that, I went through Peace Corps in Korea and public health in the countryside,
Oh, oh, wow.
and then discovered. And at that time, I wanted to become a psychiatrist. I was still on this consciousness kick, but before I left, I had actually done a year's work in a mental hospital in California, and
Where?
uh, Walnut Creek near Sonoma, not near Sonoma.
Private. Private.
No, it was a public thing. It had like 5,000 patients.
It was a state one, and because I did work with.
It was outside Los Angeles. It was about
Oh, I
100.
thought you just. Oh, I misunderstood. Are you talking about Camarillo?
No, it's called no that it's just called it was called Walnut Creek State Hospital.
Oh,
And
really? Okay, okay. It's I've
it
been
wa-
to a lot of them because I worked for the California Conservation Corps and worked on getting centers in hospitals because they had this all this available space. Uh, you know. So Walnut Creek. Oh, all right. I missed that one. All right, go on. That's interesting. Are you there? Uh-oh. David, I've lost you. All right. Did that.
you back?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, this happens the same thing as the first time. We were both calling each other, but I would accept you and then it wouldn't work. But anyway, we're back together. So,
Anyway,
you're,
it was a long training to be suspicious of big organizations in
yeah.
any respect, and you can condense it down to that. And then when I was in Japan, I got involved in all sorts
Wait,
of.
wait, wait. When you were in Japan, how did you get to Japan? How did that
I
come about?
dropped off. I was going back from Kyoto, from Korea, on my way back to the States, right?
Yeah.
And I was theoretically going to go back to go into medical school. And because that's where I had been headed to be a psychiatrist, you had to become a doctor first, right? And but I found that the whole medical thing that I went, the public health thing I went for to Korea on was basically trying to save uh, village people with a white person's, middle class white approach to medicine, which had nothing to do with their lives. And what they really needed was a revolution because they were being ruled in military dictatorship by Park Chung-hee, who was supported by all the corporate bodies there. Da, 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 da. So anyway,
Yeah.
my medical dreams were sort of fading, and I packed up my Peace Corps trunk full of uh, cannabis to pay for my tuition at school when I got back, and
What
because
are cannabis?
grass, good
Oh,
Korean weed,
oh.
and
You got weed from Korea?
yes,
Wow.
I mean Korea. When we used to go out to the villages, you'd be sitting in a bus and you'd get this waft of of really succulent weed come right across your face, and you'd turn around and there'd be a toothless old granny sitting behind you with a big pipe full of it.
Oh,
And they called it sambe, which meant cheap tobacco.
oh, I just heard it. Cannabis. You
Yeah.
said cannabis. So I was thinking this is a Korean word or something. All right. Sorry. Uh, that's funny. All right. So you packed up all this cannabis.
Yeah. Anyway, they send our Peace Corps stuff back through the diplomatic channels, so there was no checking, and it got all the way back to Maine, and I was going to go back and turn that into tuition money.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it got back before I did, and Mother got into it and took it out on their boat and sank it.
Uh huh.
So I arrived home with fading medical desires and zero budget to go on to medical school. And uh, Mother apologized, and she had kept a kilo for herself. So,
Jesus. What?
but having
God.
passed through Japan, I mean, I got thrown out of the public health program in Korea because I discovered the head of my health department was selling the WHO drugs on the black market, and it came down to him or me, and I was obviously the sacrificial
Huh.
selection. And so I ended up doing tourist development there at their ancient capital, Gyeongju, which is sort of like the
I've
Kyoto of,
been there. I love
hey,
Kyongju.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was a beautiful little town and
Yeah.
neat old temples. But you
Yeah.
remember when you were there, I don't know how much you traveled around, but it used to be covered by these really huge fucking temples. And most of my
Yeah. No, I rode bicycle all around it. There,
cool.
just there was a dude there. You might have met him because he'd been there a long time. He had a homestay for backpackers and yoga and he was really a neat guy, and you like meditation and yoga, and he had bicycles to rent. Oh yeah, it was great. I loved it. It was the ancient capital of Korea.
Of the Shilla dynasty. It was the most intelligent and advanced of the three little countries that ended up jamming together and forming modern Korea. Yeah.
Aha. Aha.
But
So, all
anyway,
right.
it was a beautiful place, and but most of my books I was writing, I was the tourist guidebooks was go out in this field, stand on this rock, look at all these other rocks that are sitting down a football field length from you, and imagine this extraordinary palace, this extraordinary temple. It was basically just getting people to try to imagine the glory that had been there before the Mongols and Hideyoshi came and burned it all down three times.
Oh, shame on them.
Yes. So when I got to Kyoto, I mean, I got to Japan. All the stuff that I've been asking people to imagine and myself to imagine was actually still standing there. And all of most of the Japanese culture is based on Korean culture. Their original
That's
leaders
right.
were all Korean and stuff.
Yeah. They have a weird trip going with Korea, don't they?
Yeah. But anyway, I loved the place, and so when medical school fell away, I went back to Japan and tried. And it was like 1970, and we thought we could reinvent the 60s there and make it go right. And so we got into nightclub work and all sorts of different kinds of enlightened hedonism, I
Well,
guess.
you had I heard about you back then. You had a place called what is Jigoku?
Jitoku, yeah.
Jitoku. That is that Hanshan or is that
Huh?
Jitoku?
Jitoku, Kanzan Jitoku was the two famous poets from the
Yeah, Hanshan.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
Jitoku was the guy that worked in the kitchen that gave the free food from the temple to all the poets and hobos that were up in the hills. And
ah,
so we thought that was a good model. So we tried to turn the place into a thing, where we could support local artists because there was no place at that time for any local singers or performers to play. It just had not entered the Japanese ecosystem, as they say these days.
Right. Where
So,
was it? Where was it in Kyoto?
near Nishijin.
Uh huh.
Well, I
Uh
mean,
huh.
we went there and we just took the first thing we did was we got an old Japanese house and we wired it up so that you could listen to rock music and through earphones and be in a really comfortable, beautiful Japanese environment, but have all of this background. And we became sort of a stop. It was the days of the great migration through, well, from the States and through Europe, and then taking the floral buses all the way across through Iran and Afghanistan and coming into India. And it was the days of those journeys and those migrations. And then everybody would run out of money in India, and then they would run to Japan, because if you spoke English in Japan in those days, you could be an English teacher in about 24 hours. So they
Yeah.
would they would come to Kyoto and crash someplace, teach for 6 months, and then head back down to Southeast Asia and back to India and stuff like that. So anyway, we became a gathering point for that that demographic, all those different strange people. And then Kyoto in those days was sort of like, I mean, for spiritual aspirants, it was sort of like Paris was in the 30s for artists. I mean, everybody came through. Ginsberg was there. Snyder spent a lot of time there.
Yeah.
Alan Watts was there. I mean, everybody came. I mean,
Well, let's go back to Alan Watts. I remember you told me about him coming to Jitoku.
yes.
I-
I don't know if it's good to gossip about the dead.
That's right. Actually, I quoted you in a piece I wrote about Alan Watts, and it was a piece full of praise of him. But, he had a problem with alcohol and his behavior when he drank.
Yeah, he was quite astonishing. I mean, when he was straight, he was quite enlightening, and when he was not straight, he could get really gross and weird.
Yeah.
He had
Uh,
the Trump grab him by the pussy thing at some one point. So
yeah. Well, you told me you had to kick him out of your place because he wouldn't stop grabbing waitresses. And
yeah,
you said you hated to do it, but he just wouldn't stop.
yes,
Is that do I remember correctly?
yes, yes.
Who did he come with?
Who was he with that time? I
He
It
was
might have been one of the trips with Ginsburg, uh,
uh-huh. He was
and
turning people on to acid too when he went there. Up but he was there more than once.
yeah, yeah. No, he came through a number of times.
Uh
I'd been impressed with him. He'd been my first sort of vibrational contact with the Zen universe.
yeah.
And so when I got to Japan, I thought, okay, here I am in Kyoto, and and I mean, this was before we set up this place and he'd gotten it going, but I wanted to explore that. And I went up to some of the temples and fell in with the foreign Zen elite. And they were extraordinarily pompous, shall we say, and horrified by my lack of knowledge of various aspects of Dharma and this and that. And I had no lineage study, and anyway. I was years. I was another version of the American Zen failure. I,
Uh,
I got out in much more shallow waters, so but I did make a lot of friends there. And did Daitokuji?
yeah.
Did you ever meet Kobori? You know,
No, I was after his time. I mean, I arrived in Japan in '88,
okay.
but I've heard a lot about him because people in from Zen Center, uh, sat with him, and I'd hear about him that way.
Yeah, he had very tight connections to that world, and he set up one of the better dojos for what do you call it? What's a
For
monastery?
Zazen. For Zazen. Uh, but now Ruth Fuller Sasaki founded a Zendo in Daitokuchi, a little temple there, and Gary Snyder was sitting there. Various people, Irmgard Schlegel, uh, Dana Fraser, but what's the did the Kabori? The Kabori was he was probably a contemporary of hers, but then she died, and he was still there. I don't quite know the overlap, or was it the same or different places or what? Do you know?
Yeah, no, he was there, but he took it back to his own little temple, and a lot of foreign deshi came in to study,
Mm-hmm.
and but then he was put in charge of the whole temple. They made him kancho of the whole Daitokuji, which is like
Oh,
60
yeah,
different temples there.
yeah,
So that kind of ate up his life. That should not have happened. It's like
yeah,
Peter's principle. I mean, he'd risen not above his level of competence, but above his level of spiritual engagement, and got
yeah.
administratively obstructed to death.
Mm,
But
mm.
anyway, that yeah, the Zen world there was very different in a lot of ways. I mean, it was different from what I expected when I got there, but by the time I left, there were, uh, you know, Richard um,
Baker.
Baker, yeah, he became a close friend. His grandfather had built a house that my parents bought in Maine, in Kennebunkport, Maine.
I know, and I had a note to ask you about that. I didn't know what it was. I couldn't remember. But that's so interesting. And I remember one time you visited him at Green Gulch Farm.
Yeah, no, I visited him a couple times, but the Green Gulch farm kind of freaked me out too because I went to the ceremony there, and it was it was so Episcopalian. I couldn't believe,
Uh
you know,
huh.
how they sort of sanded off all the edges of the Zenishness that Richard actually lived. I mean, when he was in Kyoto, he was always dressed in black and jeans and playing Rolling Stones in a breathtaking volume, and was a real Zen character. I mean, he embodied what I thought was cool about Zen at that time. And
Ah.
then I followed him to Green Gulch, and he's dressed up like a Episcopalian minister and preaching to the crowd in a homily kind of way, and being very sort of moralistic about things. And it struck me as weird, and it was actually oddly timed because I had lunch with him afterwards and said, why, what all this order and starch and stuff like that. I mean, the kid that was hitting the gongs was timing it off a digital watch while he's wearing Nike sneakers, and there was a lot of cognitive dissonance going on. And he said,
Ah.
look, people here like it like this. They want this degree of order and they want this degree of calmness and civilization, and it builds a natural bridge from them away from the Judeo-Christianity conditioning. Blah, 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 blah. And
Huh. Yeah.
but then he turned around and got caught with his pants down with one of the ladies there. And had he been a more EQ kind of guy, or a Trunkpa kind of guy, he might
Right.
have been able to pull it off. But because of all this piety that had been piled onto the liturgy there, it became much more difficult for him to survive.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah. Well,
one.
there were other factors too. Um, but yeah, I'm still close with him. He's got a place in Crestone, Colorado, and he's got a pretty big group in Germany. And
Yeah, he came over
I
well, I saw him just before I left Japan, actually, 7 years ago. He came over with his wife and his daughter, and
oh, you met them. Oh,
yeah,
how
yeah,
neat.
they took us out to
Oh,
dinner one night. It was really beautiful, and yeah, he's
that,
he's he's done well. I mean, he he survived his banishment rather better than most.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he's uh, there was this psychic I was very close to who could give me just wonderful readings on people by just telling them their name. And I said, "Tell me," and this is before all that happened. I said, "Tell me about Richard." And first thing he said, "Well, there's a guy that can be knocked down and get back up 3 times." I said, "Most people can't do that." I remember that. Um, yeah, he's you know he's we have a lot to be grateful to him for what he's created, what he's established. Tassajara, and I don't know if Suzuki's. He really helped is, get Suzuki rooted in America. But my observation of religious evolution and institutions is it's always full of problems and people very hard for people not to be flawed in various ways. They only get unflawed if there's ideal history that paints these ideal figures from the past. You know.
Yeah, there's always the human element that that contaminates the visions and the authority claims. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but in small groups,
Um,
small enough groups, at least you know who the guys are. You know their faults, you know their virtues, and you can make a conscious decision whether this is the crowd. When it gets
yeah.
when it gets huge, though, you don't know anybody at the top, and they certainly don't know you, and the interests of the institution become more important than the interests of the participants.
Oh, yeah. Well. That's a problem with institutions. Is to quote Ivan Illich, they inevitably come to thwart the purpose for which they were founded, uh, and they come to serve the institution, and it's hard for them to serve the purpose for which they were founded. That's always a problem. You have to keep like reinvigorating them or something. Um, but
You keep having to break them down. I mean, it's the hierarchy that kills. And
yeah,
every situation, and it's certainly the situation in the corporate world. And then when you have an entity like the corporation, which has no sensory interest in the universe at all except the extraction of
no,
profit, then
right,
they their only interest is their own growth, and they have no commitment to anything in the locale, whether it's their human constituents. So
oh,
I
right,
mean, it is
right,
by definition cancer. I mean,
yeah,
it's not a loose metaphor. They have every aspect of cancer that you can imagine.
yeah. To me, it's like human beings are slaves to giant robots, sort of things like uh,
Yeah,
we
but go
serve.
beyond the mechanism. Go into the biological metaphors, because it's more useful, because the if you look at them as machines, you can only think about breaking them. But if you
Uh
think
huh.
about them as living systems, I mean, like
Well,
slime
yeah,
mold or any other kind of living system, you can come up with basically immune system inspired tactics and strategies
yeah,
to
yeah,
break them down. I mean, there are tumors that are broken up and dissolve, and you go into remission naturally, and I mean that's where
yeah,
all the so-called
yeah.
miracle cures and stuff. But that
Yeah, I think
happens.
that's a good point. Ray Bradbury, I remember it made a big impression on me in his Playboy interview long ago, maybe when I was in high school. I subscribed to Playboy when I was in high school.
For the article,
Uh,
yes.
yeah, oh, the interviews, the articles, they were great. And I liked looking at the pretty women. But first, my mother and my sister would have to have it first when it arrived, really. And then when they were through with it, I could have it because they were fascinated with the pictures. uh, but Ray Bradbury was asked, well, what's the next form of life? He said, it's already here. It's the corporation.
No, there's a lot of historical observations about it that got easily ignored, and they have taken over in every serious sense of the word. And I mean, we did a Chautauqua in Maine back about 12 years ago at uh, the Maine's alternative state fair there for all the organic communities,
Mm-hmm.
and we had Ronnie Duggar, who do you know him?
No,
He's a Texan populist. And
really. I'm from Texas.
yeah,
I've met Jim Hightower a few times.
yeah, Hightower was there too. We did it with we used his brand to sell it. It was called the New Chautauqua, and then he took it on the road
Wow.
as the something democracy tour.
Ray Duggar. I bet I have friends that know him or know about him. Huh.
Anyway, we had some very cool people, and I also had one of the founder of the POCLAD, the Program on Corporations, Law and Democracy, and
Mm-hmm.
they've done the most spectacular work about the legal evolution of the corporation to the dominant power in the states. And David Cobb, do you ever run across him?
I know the name.
Okay. Anyway, they did these democracy schools all over the states for years that
Uh-huh.
trying to awaken people, and that and they are the source of this whole idea about move to amend. About having to write a constitutional amendment saying that corporations are not people, and
Right.
everything that's happened since Citizens United.
Oh, yeah.
This
Yeah.
last election was
Oh,
$14 billion. 14 fucking billion dollars.
really?
Yes.
Isn't that amazing? Wow. Well, yeah, they need to do more with the Constitution. And that you know what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said about the U.S. Constitution. She said, "If we ever write a new Constitution, we shouldn't use the one we've got as a model." um,
Yeah, I would like to see that piece if you want to pass that on someday.
no, no, it's just something she said, or I heard her quoted on that. Uh, there's some things in it that are good, I'm sure. So, so now you were in Japan. You were, uh, you were, doing jitoku. That was early '70s. Uh, Gee, I met you almost 20 years later. What happened between those two?
Well, I ran with Jito up about mid 70s, and then I we had the point where we we set up the place to try to get the kids to be interested in other kinds of music, and particularly I and my partner in the place were fascinated with blues. So we would, and then there was a Japanese musical tradition called enyo that came back from the 30s, 20s, and 30s and stuff like that. That sounded just
Uh
like
huh.
blues. So we thought if our playlist combined American blues, specifically in those days Delta blues, that they could hear the sameness, the same kind of passion, the same kind of
Uh huh.
consciousness and stuff, and sort of generate something that was, unique. That their love of because all the music from the '60s was just starting to pour into Japan. They never had much of a radio system, but they eventually people got enough Walkman and different kinds of recording devices that it came in, and then uh, we ended up like with 40 blues bands in Kyoto were coming and playing at our place,
Oh, that is great.
and
That
10
is
of them were
great.
actually excellent, excellent. I mean, it was just some of the greatest blues that I've ever heard, and from these scrawny Japanese kids, it was just beautiful outpouring. And then these kids and meanwhile, our place was getting cloned. Other people were starting up similar places around the country, and they were all calling them live houses too. I mean, that was our
Huh.
tag in the beginning.
Yeah, I remember a place that was called Live House, I think, that wasn't far from where Jay and Cuke's place was. Uh, uh, but, I don't remember
Circus
I
Circus,
don't, huh?
Circus Circus. That
No,
was
I
a
mean, I think it was called
oh
Live,
okay. Anyway,
uh, but I want to ask you something. Do you remember Zat Baran,
yes,
that
yes, yes,
place?
yes, yes, yes.
Was that sort of a live house?
Well, they would have kids come in. I mean, it was most like folk singers. They didn't have much of a stage. It was just
Uh-huh.
it was a sort
Uh-huh.
of a disjointed coffee house, and it was where the stoners came to trade stories. And
And and they had a picture of a big mural of the fat furry freak brother.
yes, yes, that was it.
And I was in Kyoto 6.5 years ago with Katrinka for 2 months, and I think Zach Braun was still there. I remember walking by to check on it, but my memory could be
Yeah,
wrong.
7 years ago it was still there.
Hmm. Ah, ah. Well, so
But
so
anyway, what happened was that all the kids there was there were enough places around that people could throw all their gear into the back of a battered old van and run around and have a tour and start to live the life of they dreamed of being a rock star. And when they got confident enough that they were ready for prime time, we took a bunch of them up to Tokyo, and some went on their own. And all the record companies just said, "Fuck off," because we can buy the real rock from America at 10 cents on the dollar. Is pure profit. There's no risk. Why should we put money on guys like you who are probably taking drugs and being weird and they're had pretty good insight into band sociology and how the
uh-huh.
survival rate and things. And all these kids just went home just heartbroken. Their path to recognition
Oh.
and glory and even survival had been cut off. It was the year the bands died.
Oh.
We went from 44 bands in Kyoto in a period of 2 years down to about 12.
Oh.
And so anyway, it was another strike against the corporate universe as far as we were concerned. And I was trying to figure out what else to do with life, and then Rita walked into my life with Friends World College, and I followed her back to India, where I had wanted to go in the first place. But when I signed up for Peace Corps, I signed up for public health in India, and the only program they had was Sanjay Gandhi's going around and cutting guys' uh, vesicles to sterilize them and
Oh.
handing them little blue transistor radios.
I
And
remember that. I remember that. And then the batteries would wear out and they wouldn't know what to do.
yeah.
I mean, I remember reading that anyway.
So anyway, I
Yeah.
did not want to see India like that from that angle.
Right.
So I ended up in Korea. But then Rita shows up in life, and she had all these wonderful connections and stories of India, and I was in love with her, so I followed her over there, and that began the whole Indian journey. And
Hmm.
anyway, and then we were back and forth between Kyoto and India, and at that time we started doing well, we had an office called COSAC, which is an international networking office, and we're trying to show people how to use the beginnings of the internet before it was the internet, when it was just bulletin board systems and green print on screens.
Did you know what's his name? Ian.
Ian
Ian.
Shortreed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a major guru, and he was a mentor for all of us out there at that time.
Uh huh.
Another guy named Dave McLean.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Ian. When I was when Katrinka and I were there 6.5 years ago, he introduced us to, oh my God, what's his name? Dave. You know the David, the famous art
David
collector,
Kidd.
David Kidd.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that. I just thought it was wrong. What was the name of his partner?
Oh, I
Um, who
I will get
ran
it back.
his?
I'm losing a
I
lot of names in my ancient age,
Yeah,
but
yeah, me too, me too. Anyway, I can find it. Uh, uh, I I
Morimoto.
huh? Morimoto?
Morimoto was his last name.
Ia
Yeah,
Ia.
I can't remember his.
Let me see. Uh, uh, I got to meet him. We got to meet him and spend a little time with him. And he had David's, the coffee shop downstairs, and it had closed. It was right across from the Kyoto
Do you want battery or
Museum,
something?
and he had like a 3-story home that was like a museum filled with the most magnificent art. And scrolls and everything. It was amazing. Um, anyway, Ian is quite an interesting character. Oh, Yasuyoshi Morimoto, Yasuyoshi, and he did the book on Shingon, the great book on Shingon. Are you there? Have we lost each other again? Oops. Did you just answer?
I did.
Ah, there you are. Yeah. Well, this is a very old little laptop, and my good laptop is coming back at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. uh, yeah. Um, all right. So, but listen, there's excellent tech support here.
Yeah.
And all I have to do is make a call. They're over here on a motorcycle. It's extremely cheap. Software is basically free. Um, I have nothing to complain about. Um, so, Yasuyoshi Morimoto. Anyway, through Ian. Oh God, and Ian's book on well, his more than a book. His what was it before there was the internet? He had like this this disc. What's it? A
CD-ROM.
CD-ROM. Yeah, CD-ROMs of Gardens of Kyoto. It was amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's an amazing guy. He has one of the best Sanskrit dictionaries online. I mean, it's quite amazing and comprehensive. He's got many facets. He's a brilliant guy.
Yeah. When I first met him, he was just so into computers, it was like new. Uh, and he was entering into his computer, I swear, everything he owned, like every toothpick. He was doing inventories. It was just getting to know it, just doing stuff with it. It was really amazing. But so go on. we got we got distracted there.
Oh, anyway, the only other the major things at that time in life were we got into conference and workshop organizing, and I met Christoph Capra,
Oh
and
yeah,
we started doing. He had a thing called the Elmwood Institute in those days, with a lot of the spacier, more progressive minds, and that were, the survivors of the '60s that were coming out and trying to come up with new formats. And he was writing books at that time. He did Mind Walk, that movie that took you through the basically everything that the Tao of physics tried to take you through literarily, and the implications of all of this for a new humane and society with distributed power and egalitarian values and spiritual aspirations. Anyway, it was all very heady, and they in Japan at that time was rocketing up the GDP curve and taking over everything and buying Pebble Beach and Rockefeller Center, and everybody said, "Who the fuck are these guys?" You know,
Right.
and all of the spiritual guys who had some history there anyway went back and saying, okay, they're going to become a big power center and they should become influential center because they have this great Buddhist history and this great Shinto history, which is nature worship, and everybody made the right connections. And then so we started doing different kinds of workshops and conferences for them. Everybody came. John Lilly came for a couple of weeks. He was a guy. So that went on, but then gradually Elmwood just also, with a little help from our friends, uh, discovered the corporate issue as being the center part of their mission, and they started a thing called Green File, which was to go out and find progressive CEOs and sell them on a green agenda for their companies, right?
What
And
year?
this was back in well, it went from late 80s to very early 90s.
Yeah, when I met you.
Yeah, it was that
Yeah.
era.
Let me ask you a question. Back earlier, did you ever meet Peter Schneider, who was also out at the Zen Center?
I don't
And
recall the name.
uh, well, he and Jane were there like 22 years or something. But Peter was involved in setting up some sort of New Age uh, uh, festival or conference. And my father-in-law from back in who became later my father-in-law when I was there in Japan, Rusty Schweikert, the Apollo 9 astronaut.
Oh, okay.
He was there, and uh, it was some sort of New Age thing. I don't know exactly what, but there was a guy named Umagami-san in Tokyo, and who had and Ryuho Yamada was living in his house in Kyoto and had a big party for everybody at this festival. And the cops came in and busted Ryuho for marijuana, cocaine, and LSD. Uh, and Rusty said they only arrested Ryuho, who was a priest, Zen priest. Uh, and and Rusty said all the police took off their shoes before coming in. Uh, but that made a lot of news back then. And when Elin came to Japan to meet me in '88, I took her to Umagami's, who was a very, very wealthy designer in Tokyo, and he showed her a magazine with a spread with a picture of her father and saying, uh, astronaut, LSD, and Zen over a 2-page spread. And that just blew her mind. Uh, but he wasn't implicated. And actually, Ryuho, I ended up getting off. One of the one in 1,000 shot people that do. But anyway, I just wanted you don't know about any of that?
No, I know there were bus running around, and I know there were people being targeted in those days, but we didn't. No,
All right.
I think I was out of the country when that happened because I had stretches in India that went for sometimes 3 to 6 months and whatever.
Yeah. Did you know Shinyo Shifuku, who translated Capra?
Uh,
Uh,
no, I met him once.
yeah.
I think he came down for one of the early workshops that we did for Elmwood, and
Yeah.
that's. But I have no real human contact with him really.
He founded CNF Communications in Tokyo, and that's where I'd stay when I was there. And he translated, the Tao of Physics and Ken Wilber, and his first book was Be Here Now. Many, many books. No longer with us. But anyway, go on. Just wanted to know if your paths crossed any of those people.
No. Uh, but anyway, what the long and short of it is that the bubble burst shortly thereafter, and so the money that was running around for you know new initiatives like we were doing, we did. I mean, one international, not one international. It was international in the sense we brought all the media people from, I mean, people involved in media from the States to have a conference on the role of media in the environment. And
Mm-hmm.
the there was always a problem in Japan because whenever you did a conference, you always had to latch on to one of the newspapers to be your PR assistant. And if you latched on to one of the papers, then none of the other papers would cover you. So we figured out if we get all of the different papers to send their environmental department, even if it's one little old lady, that
Uh-huh.
they would have to cover it because there was their own people there. And then we brought David Brower, and
Oh, yeah, wonderful, man. Friends of the Earth. Yeah.
there was the Herb Gunther, from the Public Media Center in San
I do
Francisco,
know Herb. I used to know Herb. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Jerry, dear Jerry.
Oh, Jerry Mander.
Yeah,
Ah, yeah, I knew Jerry.
Jerry was a
Yeah,
total genius. That I read Four Arguments for the Elimination of Television, and I traveled all the way across the country to meet him. So,
well, see, he and I both lived in Bolinas. uh, but actually, he was at Tassajara as a guest, and I was there just, uh, you know, I'd go for 10 days and wash dishes. It was after my company man time in Zen Center, and I didn't have a guitar, but I borrowed a guitar from somebody, and I played him a song I'd written called "Shooting the People in the TV Ads," and later he uh, gave me a copy of his book, Four Arguments for the Elimination of Television, that was signed, One Good Book Deserves Another. And so yeah, you had Herb Gunther. Oh wow, that goes way back. Jerry Mander. Wow.
yeah. So anyway, there's a lot of wonderful nostalgia there. But the end point was that they went out with this green file thing, and they spent years on it actually, trying to go around to these places and talk sanity to these corporate CEOs, and they only got two guys ever to sign on to it, and they both got fired by their boards afterwards.
Oh,
So I mean,
well,
I kept trying to, because I was already into the living systems thing, and I said, look, it doesn't make any difference who the CEO is if he's not serving the fiduciary responsibilities for the shareholders who rule the entire operation of the beast, then he's not going to be able to change anything, and he's actually going to be held legally responsible for trying to do something decent. And so
that's right.
you really can't reform them when they get to be this big.
That's right.
And the
Yeah.
primary factor, and common to all of them, was that it was always the huge ones. I mean, Main Street business is fine, and those are the guys they always put out as human shields when you go out to tax something in big business. They always show you the guys on Main Street who are going to suffer. And but
Yeah.
the uh, the overall takeover was quite clear at that point, and that's when I was starting to do all this work. I was spent a lot of time studying key and attention and its effect on politics and its effect on physiology.
Did you say chi? Chi?
Key, yeah, my Japanese
Key.
key,
Key. Japanese key. Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Got it.
and that seemed to open up the entire world for me because up to that time I've been thinking about social organisms ever since the Catholic Church and all the stuff I was running into there and watching a fascist government operate in Korea and all this stuff. It was the idea of it being a living entity, that it functioned with a life that was in some respects above, what we can manage on a personal level, the organizational matrix of it. became what we were saying before, why it became more important to serve the institution than to serve the cause for which it was created, etc. And it seemed to happen to everybody. I mean, even the so-called good guys. You know, and when Greenpeace got huge and hundreds of millions of dollars, it got very bureaucratic and weird. And you know, people like the Sea Shepherd crowd and Paul Watson and stuff, everybody started to peel away who was actually trying to do things because it was suddenly being run by the same bunch of shiny shoes against the which you were fighting,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've been trying to make corporate scale a major issue in consciousness, and I'm trying to do that again now. I'm trying to actually writing up a movie treatment, seeing if anybody who's burned out on single issue activism, because you know, do you ever see that book by Paul Hawken, Blessed Unrest?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. I
they
haven't read it though,
they did a
but
film adaptation of it. Anyway, it's about the hundreds of thousands of NGOs around the world that are fighting different fights to protect the environment or people or kids' food,
yeah.
education, whatever the
Yeah.
fuck it is.
He's brilliant. He's brilliant.
But behind all of those, everybody's fighting the symptoms, you know. And if you've got to look upstream to what's causing that, you know, what's causing the problems with the military industrial complex, what's causing the problems with, you know, our medical systems and big pharma and the big insurance companies, and the climate problems with big oil and big gas and, you know, the big fracking and the surveillance problems with big tech. And the commonality is always fucking big, which leaps to every end of everybody's tongue. And so instead of focusing on the commonness of all these different, you know, constellations of power that are totally destroying the environment and now destroying our democratic options, they everybody just sort of turns away. You know, I mean, it's like, well, they're all. I guess it must be like trying to think about overthrow the Communist Party in Russia in the 50s or something like that. People just they can't imagine that the corporations that actually have their own life, their own instincts, their own uh, malignant identity that is eventually going to destroy everything, including, you know, our social cohesion. I mean, that's why Trump was very, you know, he was very educated on how that all worked. I mean, for being so, uh, I mean, overtly stupid, he was covertly quite, quite instinctively shrewd about how you stoke up all tensions and how you divide and how you rule. You know, I mean, and
He's obviously he's got a genius. I mean, he's the one of the greatest salesman con artists in the history of the world.
yeah, I mean, P.T.
Uh,
Barnum's got nothing on this guy. So
oh yeah, good lord. No, I mean, but he's got in many ways he's like a bull in a china shop, but he can get into the shop. Yeah, amazing. Go on.
so the whole thing, anyway, the whole thing now has to somehow we have to get more and more people to focus on the the power of attention and understanding, get people to understand how valuable that is, because people are constantly being built of their attention, you know. And if you study Key, you realize it's the source of all your memories. If you're not paying attention to something, it doesn't enter your mind, it doesn't enter your life, it doesn't enter your identity, and
Uh-huh.
therefore everything you pay attention to is the content of you that is going to be preserved in this little bubble of time throughout eternity, because this bubble of time is always going to exist someplace, right? And to get people to take a religious personal recognition that attention is the most important thing they've got, and the fact that all of modern media and all of modern politics are just huge game plans to how they harvest that attention and how they, you know, that's why Trump was so powerful, because he always controlled attention. He controlled the news cycle. He controlled what people talk about and thought about. and he produced scandals and bullshit so fast that there was never time to focus before you had to move on to the next one.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was a brilliant display of misdirection, as they say in the magic shows.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and with him as a front man, the corporations are just growing more and more powerful. I mean, they don't have to bribe the people in the agencies anymore like they used to. They just plug them in, you know, with with all their corporate cards still in their pocket, and now they're running the thing. I mean, look at the fucking EPA and the postal system, every other interior department. Everybody's now basically under the control of the corporate agenda. And the corporate agenda is just unlimited growth, and therefore it's suicidal and it's homicidal and it's
Yeah.
ecocidal.
I agree. I agree. Its agenda is just growth. Yeah.
So that's cancer. So now we have to
Yeah.
figure out, and unfortunately, right now it's what they call in the trade inoperable cancer, because if you tried to wipe them all out immediately, you would destroy the entire economy and throw the whole world into, you know, the worst
Yeah.
recession of
That's
history.
that's well said. I think that's a good point. It's like maybe being a heroin addict. Well, even barbiturate addicts could die from cold turkey. But basically, heroin addict won't die from cold turkey. But a heavy barbiturate addict, could die from cold turkey. They needed to be taken off of it more slowly, and it took longer time. It was very heavy addiction. Maybe this is more like that.
Well, it's not
Um,
just the addiction. I mean, if you wipe them out, the economy now is so interconnected with all these guys that there's
well,
no way to sustain their international supply chains and production and stuff. So we would be thrown back into a huge economic convulsion, which would start. Well, I mean, you're going to see a bit of it happen right now with this COVID thing too. I mean, there's a lot of businesses aren't coming back. I mean, especially the little
yeah,
ones, and the big ones are just getting bigger. I mean, the COVID's been a godsend for them. I mean,
yeah,
so the idea right now that the whole course of the natural environment and the needs of the natural environment in terms of stepping back from big oil and big coal and big nukes and everybody that's trying to essentially contaminate the planet to death, plus the people who are still trying to stir up racial national tensions and to keep the war machines going. They're all, if they could all be broken down, and if you come up with a national strategy or an international strategy that says, you know, thou shalt have a height limit on your hierarchies, you know,
yeah.
that
Well, there's a height limit here on buildings.
yeah, and there's a
You're
speed
not
limit
supposed to
on
build a
highways.
building
There's all sorts of
high. Go on.
commonsensical limits that we do put on things that are dangerous for society or the environment. And
Yeah,
organizational scale now is the number one death threat to the planet and to democracy.
yeah, yeah.
And
Well, yeah,
if everybody focused on that from different directions, from a civil disobedience point of view or an academic point of view, I mean, if you want to study about business in America, there's 2,000 schools that will teach you how to get in and succeed inside, and be a useful member of the corporate thing. There's hardly any fucking schools that have really serious critiques about everything that corporations have done in their history, going back all the way to East India Company
uh
to
huh.
that that the destructive force that they've wrought upon the world, and environmentally and politically, et cetera, et cetera. But you
Well,
can, you
well,
can't study
I
that
want to
anymore.
say something about corporations. See if it's true that I remember reading. I guess that the when America was founded, that it was set up so that with a distrust of corporations, and that corporations had a lifespan. They couldn't, after a certain amount of time, they had to dissolve or something like that. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the whole Poclad study was. I mean, if you ever get a good Poclad book or a book by Grossman about the history of corporations, they'll tell you that whole story. But the main point of it was that the the revolution wasn't so much fought against Britain as it was against the East India Company and the Hudson Bay Company and the Virginia Colony Company. It's those were the ones that were ripping off
Uh-huh.
everybody.
Uh-huh.
So when we finally did get independence, they knew their enemies and they didn't want to grow up local versions of that. And and even Jefferson wrote against the power of the corporate bodies in those days. So
Mm.
they did not put a word. It does not appear anywhere in the Constitution, right? There's nothing about corporations at all, and they said this is all got to be decided at the most local possible level. So every state legislature will be the body that, because they were theoretically the closest to the people at short terms and living in the places where they would be affected. So they were entitled to write the corporate charters and to issue them to allow business to occur. And at first, they would just say, "Okay, we're allowing you to incorporate to build this canal or build this road or this school
Oh,
building."
uh-huh.
And then at the end of that, they would have be allowed a reasonable profit of some sort, and then they would dissolve. And then you had to go into every state legislature and you had to prove that your company was serving a public service, a necessary and important public service. And in places like Wisconsin and Nebraska and a couple of some early states on, you had to always have your books open to the public because it was a publicly chartered corporation. Therefore, the public had a right to know what was going on in the books, right? And
Mm.
you were not allowed to own another corporation. You were not allowed to merge or acquire any other thing. You had to function as a freestanding entity, and you were subject to oversight at any time that the public wanted or public officials wanted to come in and see what you were doing. You know, so
Mm-hmm.
there were very simple, straightforward things that they used to control them, and that worked for a while until some of the corporations, because of the development of the railroads, for example, they started to develop really powerful legal uh, powers and made enough money, and all of the early robber baron types were capable of buying legislatures. So
Yeah.
they started to skirt these things until you got all the way up to the Santa Clara thing in 1898, when they were able to claim the same rights as a living being, the corporate personhood.
Mm.
And that gave them all the constitutional protections, so you couldn't go in and examine what they were doing. You couldn't go in and look at their books. They had privacy and they had free speech and they had all this shit that we have, except they had millions, which are equivalent to billions of dollars today.
And they have no accountability.
Zero.
They can't. You can't. They can murder people and they don't get life sentences or anything.
No, David Corton used to point out that it's really funny that as corporate persons and recognized by the constitutions as persons, they can buy and sell other persons, which is legally slavery, isn't it?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That's funny. That's funny. Um, and now, at one point, you ran for president of the United States. Can you tell me about that?
No, I didn't. I ran for vice president.
Oh, well, all right. Close enough. Tell me about that. What party was it? What year was it? And how did that come about?
It came about. The idea was spawned by Warren Beatty, who at that time he had made this movie Bulworth, which I don't know if you've ever seen,
Oh, yeah, I saw Bullworth.
and
I
it,
loved it.
it was a brilliant, brilliant political expose, satire, whatever you want to call it, and he was polling in the early polls. He was getting something like 8 to 10% of people willing to vote for him as president. And then he started writing New York Times op-ed pieces. sort of,
Now, who are you? Are you talking about Warren Beatty?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Go on.
So I started to write to him about my theories about corporate life and corporate activity, and at that time I'd become friends with Ralph Nader, who'd come to Japan a couple of times, and we helped him organize some stuff and put him in the media and things there. So, and Nader had run before as a Green Party candidate,
Yeah.
and but he didn't. He never had any money, and he never got any media profile. So when Beatty decided at the end that he actually wasn't going to run, but he was very supportive of all these wonderful causes that we believed in, I started to try to get a conversation going between Beatty and Ralph, and Ralph would run for president, uh, and Beatty would make a movie about him running against Ralph in say as the Green Party candidate or something, and start and essentially barnstorm around and have like Lincoln Douglas debates between Beatty and Nader, and therefore Nader's campaign could get funded by the movie contract, and they could go around and get a lot of rock stars to come and start to have big events that the people would actually pay for to go to see. You know, the rock. I mean, a lot of rock bands were supporting Nader and ideas like Beatty's at the time. So, and to register in the system, I was going to run as for vice president in New Hampshire, and I registered to run there because it's one of the two places. Well, it's all gone now, but in those days, you could run, and there were some famous people that had won that before. Actually, what Al Gore had won it in a previous time. So, because of all the media attention that was falling on New Hampshire, I thought, okay, they would say, "You're running for vice president. Who do you want to be president?" And then I could say that any vote for me is essentially a vote for Ralph Nader or Warren Beatty, as the case may be. But then
Oh.
Warren
What
Beatty,
did you have a party? Did you have a name of a party?
that was a Democratic Party. I mean, at that
Oh.
time, I was running as a Green, but I had, when
Uh
you
huh.
go in, the Greens weren't registered there, so I had to go in as a Democrat. So I ran in
Oh.
the Democratic. I'm in Wikipedia as the winner of the vice presidential thing in 2000.
Where? In New Hampshire?
Yeah, that's the only place I had it, you know. And but I won in every county, and I ran a radically anti-corporate uh, campaign, and people somehow responded to it. I mean, New Hampshire is very libertarian in a sense, and they they don't like big stuff, and they don't like people pushing them around. And there was already enough corporate blowback, even in that time, that anyway the message carried. So I won. But the problem was that Beatty and Nader got into sort of an ego thing uh, about who was going to call who, and then ended up nobody called anybody. It didn't work out. So I ended up to be a lonely vice presidential candidate, and the Democrats wouldn't even talk to me, even though I'd won that damn thing. And they wouldn't even let me in the convention, let alone have a speaking slot. So,
Well, I think that was uh, you got pretty far. That's amazing.
yeah, well, that and $5 will buy you a cup of coffee, as they say.
Yeah, all right. Hey, when I remember you had this environmental organization in Kyoto that was being funded by some corporate guy, isn't that true? And Kyoke was working there as
Yeah,
she was working
that
for you.
that's where all of the late Elmwood organizing came in that media conference. It was financed by this guy who had befriended Fritzoff, and he had made a fortune in the real estate boom, that crazy bubble that they had in Japan. in the 80s and 90s.
Uh-huh.
So so Kyoko was the first hire for major conference organization, and she was a dream. She was just one of the most wonderful people to work with you can imagine. And so she worked her ass off, and we pulled off the conference pretty well. I think about 800 people came. It was the International Conference Center. It looked very august. It looked like a corner of the United Nations kind of thing when we pulled it
Huh. Oh,
together.
that's great. That's good. And it was in a beautiful. Your office was like I walked through this Shinto shrine and grounds and up in the woods, and it was right in the middle of. Uh, it was. What's that part of Kyoto?
Yoshidayama.
You know, huh?
It was called Yoshidayama.
Yoshidayama, right? And it was like a little wooded area there. It was beautiful. It was really nice. Um, huh. So, so well, you, you moved on from all of that to India,
I went
where
back to the States for a while. I went back to States from 2000 to 2008 until Obama got elected. We were there working.
you know, I met you around 2000. You invited me to come down to Santa Cruz, or somewhere near there, is near Santa Cruz, and it was like this meeting of all these like really hip people, and I remember my memory of it as being like around a campfire in the evening, maybe on the beach or somewhere in the woods.
No, it was up in the hills. It was Bonnie Doon,
Oh,
and
what was that? What was that? I
that
can't
was
remember.
for some reason. It seemed like 80% of the people that lived in Kyoto for a long time and decided for one reason or another to go back to the home country. They ended up in Santa Cruz. It had a huge
Ah,
population of Kyoto expats, and who brought all their politics and cultural things. And we'd have and Carl Barris and his wife Ginger were sort of the key people for that. And they set up a center. They had a beautiful piece of land up in Bonnie Doon, which you saw, and which was miraculously saved during the forest fires. I mean, everything around them
oh,
burned. All of Bonnie Doon had like 800 homes. At the end of it, they had 80 homes left. But that
oh.
whole valley that you were in, that beautiful valley, it was not touched. I mean, it was singed, but it was not destroyed.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah. Anyway, Santa Cruz has always been a favorite place for us because there's just so many cool people and there's so many wonderful lifestyles being experimented with there, and it's just lovely, you know, in an
Hmm.
inspiring community.
Hmm. Oh, that's yeah. It really is nice. I really like it there. Um, did you ever meet a guy named Paul Lee there?
That sets off a big.
Paul Lee. I just did a. He's 90 now, or he's turning 90 now. He was theology. He studied with Tillich and became a philosophy professor at UC Santa Cruz. A really good friend of Zen Center's, and he and Paige Smith founded the homeless shelter. And Paige Smith was a well-known American historian. The homeless shelter in Santa Cruz, and really interesting guy. I mean, you'd love meeting him uh, if you were back in Santa Cruz.
Well, if we ever get back to the States, that's definitely a pilgrimage stop because we still have a lot of friends there and a lot of memories.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so what do you got planned now in India, aside from setting aside a place for Katrinka and me to stay? I think a week isn't long enough. Uh, I don't like to go places for that short, but I don't know how I can get there. But I'm motivated. I'm motivated.
Well, right now I'm getting on in age, as you know. So
Yeah, how old are you?
I'm 75 now.
You're 75? Well, that's my age. Yeah.
That's old.
Yeah, people tell me that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure the last hurrah. I do not want to go quietly into that dark night. I really want to make some little bit of noise before I go. And trying to figure out all the connections I've had in life and all the people that have taught me stuff, and seeing the general frustration level. I mean, after everybody breathes a sigh of relief about Trump being gone, you still got to face every other fucking thing that you were
Oh,
terrified about
listen,
before.
it's just a nice thing. I mean, we're on a collision course for extinction, man, for for destroying ourselves and you know civilization collapse and but it's nice to have Biden there for a while. I mean, it's just
Hold on, let me take
yeah,
one break here. Hold 1 second.
yeah,
Okay, excuse.
yeah. So anyway, well,
So anyway,
it
the
seems
the game
go
plan
on.
is, and that's why I'm trying to write a movie script and get somebody interested in the idea um, that if you had a way to attract a lot of media talent, like the kids that do memes for all the different political causes and stuff like that, and political music and etc. If you everybody that's ever fought and lost a war against a giant corporation, whether it was in terms of the environment or the ocean or the climate or the Walmart's or whatever the fuck it was destroying your life or
Hmm.
your community. That if you could show them it's like inventing a modern germ theory. Before germ theory, doctors were divided by symptoms. If you had a fever, you went to this guy. If you had diarrhea, you went to that guy. And if you had lumbago or whatever, you went to another guy. And they didn't look upstream to what was causing the diseases. They were just dealing with what happened when you got it,
Yeah,
and how to make it more bearable. So
yeah,
if you and they, we didn't know about that because nobody knew about germs until microscopes and people started doing those experiments because they were too small. And now the major pathogen on the planet is too big for people to see. And because people really don't have any conceptual wrap on what a fucking corporation is. They know the logos or they know the products or they maybe know the CEO if he's a noisy guy. And but how the corporation functions and what its effect is on the planet. I mean, to look as if you were an alien coming into the Earth, into the biosphere, and saying, what is running this planet? What is determining its evolution? What is determining the culture that it will tolerate and the cultures that it will extinguish, etc. I mean, an outside eye you think could recognize this pretty quickly, but somehow we're here in the middle of it, and all of our attention is spewed out upon their advertising and occasionally court cases against them, which flare up and disappear and are just paid off as the cost of doing business. And people don't have a sense of how a corporation functions in a living ecosystem like our planet and our societies. And if you could show
mm,
them that it is a living system and it has all the biological markers of a living system. I mean, it is born, it grows, it can learn, it has all the functions of communication and excretion, and you know it the the parallels are just too dramatic to ignore, and yet they've been totally ignored. And on the
mm,
other side, there's the biomimetic crowd that keeps going back to nature for brilliant ways to deal with design problems, right? I mean, every so many of the new technologies that we're coming up with now are things that were taken off natural. forms. I mean, the way that shells form, or the way that insects build nests, or the kinds of biological adaptations that allow lizards to climb on the ceiling, give you all these technologies are coming straight out of nature. So they just call biomimetics, right? They just copy what nature does to solve
Hmm.
problems. And the biggest biomimetic lesson is the human body, which is the immune system, which can tell what is dangerous to the survival of the system, and then they attack it. But they attack it in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different kind of immune cells that all have different roles. And like there's the dendritic cells that find the problem and identify it and start to send out molecular signals saying, "Hey, fuck, we got a problem here." And then that attracts other kinds of the white blood cells, the different aspects of the immune system, macrophages and neurophages, and all there's a whole list of technical terms for the different roles that these things play. But you can play them off against what exists in the activist universe. We have, I mean, like whistleblowers and investigative reporters and things like WikiLeaks and stuff like that are a perfect analog for what the dendritic cells do in the body, saying, "Hey, we got a problem here," and then it attracts other kinds of cells to come in and attack it in various different ways. And there's no organization to it. There's just a common goal, is to get rid of this deadly intruder. And because there's no organization, there's no way that an organized disease system can fight back against it. The problem is with our current activism. If you're interested in the ocean, then you'll go to Greenpeace or Sea Shepherd or something like that, and then a whole hierarchy will grow up around that, and then you have ways to attack that, because there's a center to be, surveilled or tarred or defamed or defunded. There's a lot of different ways to attack. I mean, that's what we know in India now. They're finding a lot of different ways to take down all the NGOs that are against the current government and the racism here. So it's if you approach it from a medical point of view, you can have a distributed, very powerful reaction to a pathological condition like corporate dominance and corporate suction on the economy and on the ecosystems of the world. And people can start to fight in different ways. And the beautiful thing about this, the prep for this, is the last 20 years, because all of this go local stuff, I mean, people going back to local agriculture and setting up CSAs around the cities so that local farmers can survive, and getting away from, the pesticide-ridden thing, and this whole new regenerative agriculture movement in the States. There's a lot of stuff happening to make local communities stronger, and David Korten was always, working on that. I mean, a lot of people were working on it, but there have been real icons. But if you're only focusing on the ground level, of making the world ready for the another world that's possible, but you're not focusing on the upper stories, where these huge climax trees that are shading out everything on the ground, you end up where we are. I mean, you have to have a focus both on the ground to make that richer and more livable, culturally and economically and environmentally. And yet you have to get rid of the major pathogens in the neighborhood. You have to stop the Walmart sweatshop chains around the world, and you have to stop the constant suction of military budgets upon the entire national. I mean, the national budget, is like 52% military, and that's just what we know in the white. So all of these things, and including all of the energy, problems. All of Obama never was able to stop any of the subsidies to the major petrochemical stuff. So you wonder about the commitment, and certainly you're not going to get the commitment out of Biden. So you have to be able to get people to look at these things in a different way, and it's sort of like answering a riddle. And once they know the answer to the riddle, then they can come up with all sorts of ingenious immune-like responses on their own, you know, and some of it can be
Mm-hmm.
legal and some can be civil disobedience illegal, and some of it can be academic, and some of it could be educational, and some of it could be spiritual. But we have to take these things down so that the tops of our organizations, if you were sitting in there, you can still see the ground and you still know the people underneath you and they still know you. So they have to be reduced radically in size, and they have to be democratized so that all the stakeholders have a place at the in the directors board. And once you have all the stakeholders, I mean, the people are fighting for the environment, and people are protecting labor rights, and people are protecting the community rights. If they're sitting on the board, you don't need these huge government bureaucracies that are supposed to be controlling them, protecting them. I mean, protecting society from them, because they will have internal checks there by the people that are actually being affected. So the government will stop growing, because once these bureaucracies get huge, the corporations just go in and capture them. And so they end up working for the corporations instead of protecting us against them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like a fairly clear, logical path to reorganize a lot of really frustrated activists, because the burnout rate among activists is pretty high, because you can fight for decades and never really win. You know, you can slow things down, but as long as there's a profit on the other side, that corporation will come up with a new budget, or a new corporation will come up and go after it. You know, it's just
Yeah.
too tempting for them, and they're all getting paid for all these things, whether they succeed or not. And everybody that's fighting against them is not getting paid and paying out a lot of existential energy and attention that is not really rewarded. You know, so people, it's natural. People say, "Well, okay, I put in my 10 years, and now I'm going to go off and enjoy the grandkids and shit like that." You know,
Mm-hmm.
so it's trying to reframe the conflict as between, you know, us primitive, sensuous, spiritual bipeds and these huge corporate entities that are sucking us dry.
Now, do you have a name for this?
Well, this is the form. I mean, part of it's big medicine, but part of it is I'm trying to set up something called the Sacred Animals Party,
Uh-huh.
and I would like to I would like to register it as a religion, that basically says that the most access you have to truly divine experience is going to be through your own sensual apparatus.
Um, you know how you register a religion in America? Isn't the only organization that really recognizes religion the IRS?
Well, that's sort of enough. I mean,
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? I don't what else?
so
uh,
anyway, if you did that, and but you also had that, this is what I don't understand. This is what I'm looking into right now. Is if you can register religion with profoundly political missions as well as religious mission, right?
mhm.
I the because if you're trying, I mean, I'm trying to encourage the idea of the Sacred Animals Party is basically that this is also a problem I had with Buddhism a long time ago. When I when I started to study about Zen and stuff like that, and started to look at how it was practiced there, and I looked at the patriarchal nature of the whole Buddhist establishment, and then followed that back to China, where it happened, you know, where all of the sensuality of Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, Tibetan Buddhism was actually really intelligent. I mean,
Yeah.
they the whole Red Hat Lamaism thing was that the experience of sensuality, if it's properly understood and properly experienced, is the closest you can come to a divine state of consciousness, in the sense that both of the level of sensual ecstasy and the merging of two people into a single conscious entity, you know, where your ego totally breaks down out of pleasure, not out of altruism or anything like that. I mean, it's a pretty fundamental, primitive call upon our abilities. And when you those times when the earth moves, those sort of transcendent moments that you have in sexuality. I mean, a lot of people have experienced that, and the research that I've been doing on this is that a lot of it has to do with synchronization, and this is also the source of a lot of group religious experience. Where you get people to synchronize their breath with chanting or music or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that synchronizing the breath will gradually bring the hearts beat together so that the hearts synchronize. And when hearts synchronize, it has enough rhythmic entrainment capability that it slowly can bring the brain waves together. And especially when you're in a semi-meditative chanting state, it starts to bring your brain waves into sync in a alpha state, right?
Uh-huh.
So at that point, you have the emanations of group group spiritual experience. I mean, that people will come away from those experiences like if somebody was just taking acid for the first time and saying, "What the fuck was that? What happened?" Because they do feel a transcendent we-ness, and for a moment will lose their sense of personal borders and boundaries, and feel the power of the group together. And when that
Yeah.
happens, if that happens in a Buddhist temple, then they will tell you, they will give you the Buddhist explanation for it. If it happens in
Mm-hmm.
a Catholic church, and like among the charismatic Catholics, they say, "Oh, that is Jesus, or that is Mother Mary who's come, to visit you and give you grace." And if you say it, if you, any particular religion will tell you why it's specific to their religion, and it's not a fact that you are actually generating that as a sentient human being who has somehow created this superconductive state in a group, which creates a feeling that feels hallowed, that feels holy, that feels totally inspiring and uplifting.
Mm.
And then the guys who own the real estate try to make you grateful to their god who they have the control of the door to, but it's really the people themselves. And then once people start to recognize that the transcendence capacity is within you, and all you have to do is learn to sync your physiological and neural rhythms to such a point that there's no discriminable difference between what's in my mind and what's in your mind at that time, right?
Mm.
You ever There's a
Mm.
beautiful temple right down by Sanjo called Chioin on the way to Yasaka Jinja. Have you ever been up to there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, they have
Um,
a mountain gate
uh,
that
mhm.
in the room over the gate. There's a room over the gate that can hold about 100 and 120 people. I mean, the gate's that big. And once a year, they have this thing where people from who belong to the Chilean Buddhist community, or anybody who wants to go, they will chant all night long, and they will give everybody a little hand drum, and you will begin chanting about 9 o'clock at night, and it will go till sunrise. And
Mm.
you get really strange there. I mean, the percussion, the breathing, and people walk out of that with a lot of people walk out of that with a really sincere, profound religious experience. And it all is the synchronization of that group together. And the
Mhm.
way it's been organized, nobody's there to tell you, okay, that was the which Buddha that was that visited you or whatever. So people
Yeah.
do end up walking out, scratching their head, but totally, experientially impressed that something of spiritual value and significance has happened. And whether you can experience, I mean, explain it or not, it's one thing, but it's like a really special drug trip or a really special evening making love.
Mhm.
Something inexplicable but important happened. You know.
Something I remember from maybe I read you wrote or we talked about was the Confucian influence on Zen, that, sort of creating its more hierarchical and what would you say, sort of, militaristic type form. Was that, wasn't that?
I mean, I wrote some throwaway stuff on that. It was just about the elaboration of hierarchies and how they once you have a hierarchy and the value system that comes with that, whether it rises out of merit to begin with, but it soon becomes, genetic or somehow enforced with other means. So
Mm-hmm.
the whole Confucian idea of centralized authority, uh, you know, fit into the Chinese model pretty well.
Yeah.
So the yeah, I mean, it's the mass production of believers in a religion that depend more on dogma than on actual physiological sensual contact with what divine love might feel like, and you
Mm.
end up you end up learning rules and routines, but you're not being fed by the you know the the initial psychological liberating explosion that can happen that makes you think that all of a sudden, all right, religion is not just a bunch of words. It is actually a connection to the living earth and to the living world and to the living, your brethren and sistren.
Mm-hmm.
That's the basis for do unto others. I mean, all of this stuff gets talked about, but somehow when the religious ideas of love that are and unity and liberation that all of the religions preach in the beginning, and within a few centuries they're all killing each other, or
Right.
or
Right.
finding new people to oppress and setting up really disastrous hierarchical divisions among their own people. So
Yeah.
it's been a death trip, that whole organizational accumulation and centralization of power.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Yep. It seems to me, what do you think about this? That the role of Confucianism in Asian culture is what's, what has led to progress or to picking up, to joining in on the Western uh, technological industrial trip and then running with it. And, uh, the it just seems they fit together perfectly, but that it will outrun the West.
Well, what just because the great emphasis is placed on hierarchical precedence? I mean,
Well, it seems to go along with the corporate thing. It seems to fit in there pretty well, and and the places where there's, I mean, where there are tall buildings and uh, wealth and all that, it seems to be coming out of the Chinese communities, not out of the local native communities in Southeast Asia, for instance. Uh,
well, I mean that. Uh, yeah, but I don't know how much that has to do with. I mean, Confucianism is just something that celebrates hierarchy and superior inferior relationships and makes that an inevitable part of human reality and what you're supposed to think is normal. It's like the caste system in India.
yeah,
So it doesn't.
but wasn't it more thing? Wasn't Didn't it create a system that's more based on merit, on education? I said, didn't Confucianism encourage, uh, like civil service system, and that we're advancing, and it was based on merit rather than blood.
Yeah, no, I mean it was to that extent it was civilizing. Uh, if you could get everybody to obey that. But the point was, once those systems were created, they took on a invidious life of their own.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, and once it makes that turning to protect that system and protect everybody that has risen through it, and because all of their positions and all of their status and all of their self definitions therefore depend on the system to which they've committed their lives to. And
Yeah.
therefore that becomes more important than realities on the ground. And when you bring in other religions to compete with that, then it becomes kind of a warfare state. And when you bring in other cultural elements that either support or detract from it, get on, they will generate friction or they will generate embrace. So right now, but I mean, it's a fluid situation because it's only recently that, I mean, that I've noticed recently, being the last 30, 40 years, that people have noticed that the combination of corporate power and a fundamentalist minority. Uh, I mean, the corporations generate the policies, and the minority generates the voting bank that will put their representatives into power. And that hasn't changed at all, as far as I can see. And certainly Trump learned amazing lessons from that because he rallied up all of the lowest id level of the society that was in some ways righteously pissed at the whole system. And he was such a reality TV star that he was
Hmm.
inviting everybody into the conversation. So everybody would wake up the next day and say, "What horrible thing happened? And what did he say now?" And all this other stuff. And he was meanwhile sending them all tweets, like all 80 million of them. And
Hmm.
so that as his base, and then he goes after and he makes friends with everybody with guns, all the police departments, the military, gives a boost in budget, which they didn't even want or ask for. And so if you got the police and you got the military on your side, and then you're giving the biggest tax breaks in history to the corporations, so they'll fund you down the back door, then it seemed a pretty savvy path to a real importantly fascist takeover.
Yeah, 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 yeah. There was some study that said, or some organization that that looks at uh, the level of democracy and fascism, and it said that countries that get as close to fascism as America has, the various steps it's gone through, 4 out of 5 times can't get back to democracy. That they will continue to slip into fascism, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I believe there is a resilience there. I mean, I mean, look what Chile just got to rewrite their whole fucking constitution, after a year and a half
Yeah,
in the streets. And Bolivia came back. I mean, there's a lot of fascism that, I mean, I want to believe it is becoming a bit old fashioned.
yeah, yeah. I hope so. I hope so. Well, now what if we go back to Key? Um, don't you think that uh, being in touch with your key and your and your senses, your sensual pleasure, uh, grounding you. Uh, do you see this as helpful antibodies to the corporate uh, enslavement
Well, yeah, I mean,
of?
but it's like local farming, and it's like all the grassroots work. You're building the basic uh, survival mechanisms that you need as a community or as a living being with this. And if you pay attention to attention, which I try and figure out a way to make that a major plea to the world, that you understand that the more you internalize intention, I mean, the idea, I mean, you can look at it from a sexual human interaction point of view. You can look at it just from a pure healing point of view. I mean, most of the really popular new healing alternative therapies, like Vipassana or all these different variations on yoga that are happening now. My daughter's learning fascia yoga, that and different ways to internalize your intention and track things through your body. Those are, I mean, there's even tapping now. You know, you heard of tapping? People actually, they build a whole tiny cottage industry around tapping yourself in different places and writing up little guidebooks on how
Uh-huh.
that cures you. But anyway,
Uh-huh.
anything that
Uh-huh.
that takes your anything that takes attention, which is a vital force, an enlivening force,
Yeah.
and turns it into your own internal ecosystem, is a healing is a healing approach. And
Yeah.
all of the world today is designed to steal your attention and drag it over here. So eventually you'll invest in this, or you'll vote for this, or you'll buy this, or you'll subject yourself to this. Everything. I mean, the number of advertising like messages is just bewildering. It's like thousands a day go. I mean, people who live in the cities. There is no
Yeah.
longer a natural environment. There's just all these pea thieves out there grabbing for your attention. And that's the whole
Yeah,
model
and
for
people
all.
wear them.
Yeah.
People wear them. And if you watch sports figures playing their sports, they're wearing
Mhm.
advertisements and it's everywhere. Yeah.
So that's what there was a book written a while back about the attention economy, and it wasn't very profound in terms of the other aspects of what attention was important for, good for, but the economic aspects of it and now have been researched to death probably the last 20 or 30 years by all the marketing firms in the world. And so we've gone from, the basic tits and ass things to sell motor oil to more subtle forms of tits and ass and provocation. But they're learning a lot about how to attract and hold human attention. And AI, artificial intelligence, hasn't even kicked in yet. you know.
Uh,
So, I mean, the amount of human attention that flows into televisions, that flows into video games every day. I mean, it's just gigatons of energy, or gigavolts of energy, that if they were directed toward human-based problems and social problems, it, we would prevail almost immediately. There's just so much talent and genius. I mean, it shows up all over the internet in all different kinds of ways. But you just have to get people to focus on something, and which is almost impossible anymore. Everybody's proud of how they can multitask and don't have to focus, or don't want to focus. And
uh,
and the more you do focus, and the more you start feeling things inside your body, I mean, it's a natural thing. You turn away from things that are painful, and you turn toward things that are pleasurable. And so people really don't want to
mm,
look at the whole social scene so more, because, all right, this is a beautiful scene. You can take it as a photograph, but then looking down below at the human reality behind it and the implications of it for the next generation and all of that stuff, nobody really wants to go there because it's painful, you know.
mm,
So
yeah.
it's right now trying to get people to understand that by focusing their attention on themselves and what is necessary. I mean, every one of us is what, 30 trillion fucking cells, 30 trillion little guys in us, all with our entire genetic makeup and all with the proper cloning technology could generate a perfect genetic copy of us, right? 30 trillion.
Wow.
You can't count. I did a math the other day, and if you're trying to count to a trillion, one digit a second would take you 1,300 years, right? And yet,
Oh, really?
yes. So we're not equipped to deal with that level of scale. And when you think about, you got 30 trillion cells in your body, you've got about 300 trillion stars in the universe, and you think about your place.
More than that. More than that.
whatever.
Yeah.
They're
But go on.
still some debate, but we're talking multi trillions, and you're right in the very center of that, right? I mean, you ever see that Powers of Ten movie?
Yeah. That's great. I love
That
it.
I think should be the greatest meditational lead-in of anything. I mean, if you Doris Lessing you based a meditation on that, which I loved.
Oh. Huh.
You try to imagine your infinite smallness, even with respect to the galaxy, let alone the fucking universe. And then you come zooming back and you go into your to down through the cellular level, the molecular level, and the atomic level, and then the quark level, and it's almost a perfect. I mean, that's what Powers of Ten was trying to demonstrate. It's almost a perfectly parallel trip, and you're stuck here in the middle, speaking for 30 trillion little beings as if it was a singular entity in which you've got total control, in which you really don't understand 98% of the stuff that's happening at any particular second anyway.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to absorb the improbable magic of that equation, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that should make you feel like the power of attention and your consciousness that could exist within that and function and focus and recognize. And in the earth environment, at least in the natural earth environment, the fact that you you harmonically respond to beauty around you at every level, whether it is the beauty of the universe, the clouds that we see from the Hubble telescope, or will you go down to a super powerful microscope and look at the beauty of this in the algae of the ocean, or the
Mm.
protozoa, or the beauty of the gems and the minerals that come out. I mean, we the, the the lavish array of beauty that has been given to us as dwellers upon the earth, and the devastation that we have wreaked on it by not recognizing the very hallowed significance of that resonance.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what's got to be returned, and all of the media frenzy to grab people's attention and focus it outside themselves on stuff that is trivial, superficial, or competitive. I'm just totally obnoxious in terms of focusing their fear and their hate. Then uh, people have to learn to reclaim themselves and to have that as a really powerful force. And that's why I was really disturbed that sensuality that was such a strong part of tantric Buddhism in well, Tibet and major parts of India, that also got washed out. And saying, okay, you can see these pictures, but that's just a metaphor. We don't really want you to do this. We want you to just see that as an expression of the gods themselves, of wisdom and understanding coming together, and making it all very, intellectual and conceptual
Mm-hmm.
and not physical, and therefore not experiential, and therefore not motivating you to actually change your life. You know?
Mm.
Because once you find it
Mm.
in your body and in your lover's body and in your local group body, all the temple business goes out of business. You know.
Oh yeah. 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 Um, yeah. That's true. Well, you know, temples. The business of temples should not be business, right? They should be poor. That pope that died after 33 days, Pope John Paul. He said he came and he said the church should be poor,
And they poisoned his
and
tea.
yeah, and he was gone pretty soon. Um, well, I think it's time for us to wrap it up for today. This has been amazing. This has been great. I really like your point of bringing it all back to attention. That's that's where I'm at. I think that's right. I think that's the best. That's the big medicine.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was hopeful.
Yeah.
I wrote some stuff.
Uh,
I'll send you. I wrote a series on key and attention. I'll send it to you. Experientially, have you ever been to a good ketchup?
oh God, yeah, that's my favorite. Oh, I love it. Huh.
That is the key attention furnace. That is when I was talking about because when the only time I ever been there was like in 1976, I guess, and the we're out in this village, and this kid comes up and says, "Come, come, come!" And we followed him over the hill and down this little valley, and there was a village ketchup going on, not a tourist ketchup, and they had little girls dancing in the center, and there were about 200 guys around just sweating their asses off, just doing the routine. And then
That's amazing.
and one of the girls, her eyes just rolled up into the back of her head, and she starts spewing. We don't know what she was saying, but they were saying she was like doing prophecies for the village or something like that.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
that level of spirituality, where you actually see things happening, and they used it for healing, they used it for lifting curses, they used it for all, I mean, it was a spiritual technology that was handed down over centuries, and it's still really important. Whatever the overall ideological framework of it, it could have been anything probably, but the what it actually happens on the ground is what is generated by that group of people. And that's when I'm saying that synchronization, because you see how they breathe and how they pour it out. And so these guys that were doing it, we got to talk to a couple of them afterwards, and they can lose like 2 kilos in water in the course of the
uh,
night, just flowing
yeah.
off them.
Yeah. Well,
Extraordinary.
Ketchuk. I first, you know who Andrew Weil
Yeah,
is,
yeah, yeah.
right? Uh, well, he. I was in his home in like 1978 in Tucson, and he put on a tape of Ketchuk from Bali, and I was just amazed. I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever heard. And I was into underground music and new wave music and stuff like that. I still do music, incidentally, uh, and I just thought that was great. And I thought I got to get to Bali and hear that. And finally, in '92, Elin, you met Elin, huh? Who I was married to when I was in Japan. She and I, on our way back to America, spent 2 months here in Bali, and I heard Katchak 3 times in the country, with like 100 guys, uh, and just amazing, so powerful. I don't know. I've heard some good Ketchucks. I really like it, but nothing like that. I do know people that know, you know, uh, more about, what's happening in the hinterlands here. So I might catch one, something like that. But, mainly I work. I mean, this is a great place to concentrate on work. And I have, websites and blogs and work on writing. And I communicate with people a lot, very involved with people. And,
No, well, be able to live a
uh,
place like that and have the international connectivity is just astonishing blessing. I really
yeah,
congratulate you for having put all that together, and you're using it in such a powerful, inspiring way. So I congratulate you. And matter of fact, I will probably, maybe, hopefully visit you probably before you visit me.
oh, yeah, I do.
And we're
I
also
do.
we're,
Come
we're
here.
trying to
But,
send a young friend from here who's a really brilliant self-taught architect designer, extraordinarily brilliant young guy, and he's fallen in love with bamboo. And he was supposed to be doing a big bamboo project in Nepal, and then the COVID thing hit and killed that. And meanwhile, he discovered what's her name, Eloa Hardy, and Tom Hardy studied with Linda Garland, the woman who brought back the extraordinary bamboo resurgence in Bali, and these guys end up doing the green school there.
Oh, the Green School. Yeah, 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 yeah,
Well,
yeah.
the Mother Teresa of all of that was a woman named Linda Garland.
Uh, but she was the inspiration,
Yeah,
huh? Yeah, I've been to the Green School a couple of times. It's yeah, it's a nice place. I also got to meet a fella here named Emerald, who he was an Al Gore presenter. I know a few. I've known a few Al Gore presenters here. Inconvenient Truth presenter, and Emerald built. And they figured out the technology and everything. He built a big hotel out entirely out of bamboo. Like I don't know, 15 years ago or something. He was involved in uh, fixing up the water temple here in Tirtaganga. Ganga is the same as Ganges,
yeah.
the Ganges River, right? But Emerald's the one that would know about bamboo. Well, but also Power of Now Yoga right here is entirely bamboo building. It's beautiful, and we go to Genius Cafe on the beach. It's sort of mainly vegan place, but not entirely. It's out of bamboo. I mean, there's a really nice bamboo stuff here. Now, you remember Paul Disco from Japan?
Yeah.
Yeah, he, he I was talking to him, and I was telling him, well, the to get a building to last with bamboo, the bamboo has to be treated. Uh, I said, now we have a bamboo. I had a bamboo fence and gate built here around the area where our water pump and to keep tools and stuff. But it rots after a couple of years. I just have it replaced. And he said, "Yeah, that's the right way to do it."
No, well, you can soak it. You
But
can soak it in borax and or is it boron? It may boron. Anyway, if you soak it, they're doing that here in India now, and it will last for 20 years.
pretty
And
good, pretty
there's a
good.
guy in Guma Prefecture in Japan who figured out a baking process, and he's had it last. He's been able to use stuff for 50 years, and he was trying to
Oh,
commercialize that. And actually, Linda
wow.
Garland's adopted Indonesian son, a guy named Arif Rabik. He came over, and Kaz was his cultural advisor and translator and stuff. And Kaz ended up doing some designs for them for little bamboo pagodas, some project they were doing.
Now, where does she live? Is she in Japan?
No, she is dead. She passed away,
Oh, I
I think,
see.
2017, 2018. He's there in Bali. I mean, that's the base. He's got a thing called a Thousand Village Project, where they're trying to build.
Thousand Village
Yeah,
project here.
they're rebuilding local villages using bamboo technology, and he's trying to spread all over the. Anyway, I'll send you a link to him. Well, anyway, I was just going to
Uh,
say we're trying to send this guy down there to study with this Arif and this Aloha lady, and they have a thing called Bamboo University, and
Bamboo
yeah,
U.
and
Where is it? Is it?
I don't know exactly where it's located, but
Well, I can find out. That's all. A lot of stuff's happening around Ubud. That's sort of like the cultural artistic center. And that's very close to here. Uh, and of course, there aren't any tourists here now to speak
how
of.
far are you from Ubud?
No. Well, right now, I can probably get there in 35 minutes from here
Oh,
because there's
beautiful,
no
beautiful,
traffic to
beautiful.
speak of.
Anyway,
Well,
if we do succeed in sending him over there, I'd like to connect him to you and to take him to that jazz coffee shop. He's a music lover also, and he would love your stories.
um, and is he from a native Indian?
Yeah, he's a
Uh,
Vishwakarma. His caste is the caste that built the palaces and the great They're the the major architectural craftspeople of India.
I think Sandeep, who's a yoga teacher that just lives about 2 minutes from here in the, is I think he's Brahmin, uh, and yeah, I've known a few Indians here. I have some Pakistani Hindu friends. I mean, they were born in Jakarta, but their lineage is from being Pakistani Hindus. Well, all right. Well, let's stay in touch.
All right, sir. It has been a great collision. Thank you so much for looking me up and reconnecting. And I'm amazed by the communication technology that exists in the villages there. And yeah, you've lit up some ancient nostalgia.
Yeah. Well, uh, yeah, drop by. Uh, it's you'd love hanging out here some, I think. But you'll never see a kachak like you saw it in '76, though, or maybe we could find it. Uh, they tend to, have smaller groups now.
They don't have to be big. I think part of the thing is, you remember the minion idea that 10 people come together in Judaic practice and 12 apostles. I mean, the coven
Yeah, yeah,
thing of
yeah.
12. So if you look at placebo psychology, it take about 15% to 20% of any human group will respond to placebo. I mean, feel generate in their body what it is their mind is
Uh
expecting.
huh. Yeah.
And so if you have like a minimum group of 10 or 12 people, there's always going to be somebody there that lights up and can communicate that.
Ah.
So a small ketchuk, I mean, as long as if you have 20 people there, I think that's sufficient.
I.
And for all of
Uh,
these synchronization experiments that I was thinking about, to get people to come together and experience their own power, not have to attribute it to any particular deity or,
yeah.
temple god
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
works, it really works.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got to run too, but it's been a delightful day, sir. And
Yeah.
that plus the Biden thing, you actually cheered me up more than the Biden thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a good day. It's great to talk with you. Okay.
Talk to you
Yeah. Hey,
soon.
thanks a lot.
Great
Take
talking.
care. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Thanks a lot to David Kubiak for being our most fascinating guest today. Uh, yeah, I've given a lot of thought in the days since I talked to him about chi, ki, attention. Attention is healing. I mean, isn't that what we do? We are always paying attention, right, to something. There's no inattention. But to pay attention to our body and to move attention from the thought stream and from the constantly having an idea of self to not just our body, but the body around us, which is just the extension of our body, to just what we're doing, and to our breath. And if we have some problem, paying attention to it and breathing with it. Anyway, that sort of thing I've been thinking about. It's just the stuff I do normally, but he had a slightly different way of saying it, and I appreciated that. So until we meet again, this is DC Poohbah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Doggett Bandita Feline Cuchita and dear, lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.